Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to you by 99-cent patches. You can get 99-cent patches all January long at whichsidecollective.org. You just have to enter the promo code SNOWGODS. Or, if you prefer, you can enter the promo code SNOWMASTERS.
Because whether you have no gods or no masters, you can get 99-cent patches.
Snow Gods or Snowmasters.
Oh, my bad.
So just go to whichsidecollective.org and get you some sweet, sweet patcheroos.
This is episode 166.
We have Simon Springer on.
You know, when you have a conversation with somebody and they're super chill and it's an awesome conversation and you end it realizing like they're way smarter than you? Right? That's how I felt at the end of this one. I loved it, but god damn it, Simon, you're way smarter than I am.
Yeah, it was a really fun talk. We talk about anarchism and veganism.
And veganism, yeah.
And everything else in between. So check it out.
So stay tuned for the professor.
You're already checking it out. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense. I just won't say any of that. Just cut it.
No, it's in there now.
Peter Kropotkin as a geographer.
I didn't know he was a
I
geographer.
didn't either.
God damn it.
So weird.
Simon, you're so smart. Hey, Jordan, what news and events do we have going on this week?
Well, if you are in Salt Lake City on January 12th, check out the Dump Trump event. It's a rally against Donald Trump and his racism and Islamophobia. You know, obviously we're against all the candidates, but Donald Trump is just especially fucked, and it's scary. So,
whatever happened to the baking brigade? I'd love it if he got pied.
yeah, that would be so good.
Oh,
He would
man.
probably have them executed once his reign began.
You know what? If he gets pied, I'll give anything in the collectible store to whoever does it. Fucking I'll do it out of my own pocket.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Take up the challenge. Pie the Trump. It'd be even better if you did it with poop. And then you could literally dump on the Trump.
Poop pie.
Poop pie.
Also, speaking of Donald Trump, if you're in New York on January 15th, check out the Storm Skanska event by No New Animal Lab.
This week's listener shout out is brought to you by Chuck. He didn't want to record it, so I'll read what he said for him. Chuck here. My 10-year vegan anniversary is on January 21st, 2016, so I thought I would donate to celebrate. Shout out the Food Empowerment Project or talk about your toe jam or something. Maybe threaten to talk in detail about your toe jam unless people donate money to their favorite charity. Eh? That's a good idea. I don't think anyone wants to hear me talk about my toe jam, Chuck. And then he ends it in classic fashion. Fuck shit damn. Thanks, Chuck, and congratulations on your 10-year veganversary. If you want to do a shout out, just head on over to whichsidepodcast.com, click on donate. You can record your own, or we'll read it for you.
Jeremy, what's the slingshot?
Did you know that on January 14th, 1918, Emma Goldman was sentenced to 2 years in prison for obstructing the draft?
Nope.
There you go.
I mean, I probably knew. I just didn't know the date, because why would I know dates?
Yeah, well, you don't read your classic anarchist, so whatevs.
I don't. Because I'm a modern anarchist.
You don't read your modern anarchist.
Well, I'm an anarchist. Don't tell me what I need to do and don't do.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
How's your day going so far?
Not too bad. You're my sixth meeting of the day.
Sixth meeting?
Holy crap, 6 meetings. What the hell do you do all day?
Meeting with grad students and faculty members, stuff like that. This was a big meeting day. Usually I'm not in 6 meetings, but
I've never, like, I hate meetings. Like, most meetings are just so, like, not productive.
That's how I feel.
And they're so forced, and I don't know.
yeah, sometimes. I mean, if it's like this, if it's just kind of hanging out, it's all right. But when there's too much of a set agenda, then yeah, it can be taxing for sure.
I think for like work and stuff, most meetings could be handled in an email.
Yeah, well, email's the bane of my existence, though, too. Like,
Yeah.
I try to keep my email box clean, and it just never happens. Like, I've got 27 emails awaiting responses sitting there for me now, and it's just, it never ends. You think you get it cleaned up, and then there's a new one. So sometimes I just wish people would knock on my door instead of sending an email, honestly, because then it's, dealt with immediately rather than the time taken to compose a response and all of that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm getting to the point in my life that I prefer, like, a phone call from somebody instead of a text message or an email, just because it gets lost in everything else.
Yeah, for sure.
But I deal with, at my 9-to-5 job, I deal with, like, a lot of technical, like, engineers and stuff. So I'll be in meetings, and my part of my job is literally 30 seconds for a 2-hour meeting. I'm like, why the fuck am I here?
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry.
That's all right.
So how did you get into into being in the education field?
No aspiration whatsoever. And originally, I was a horrible high school student and just didn't want to be there at all. And after I graduated high school, I basically went to community college to please my parents. Like, I didn't have the grades to get into university, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but they wanted me to be there. So I did a couple of years doing that. But at the time I was playing in a band, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I basically did really poor in the first couple of years of community college and dropped out of that, and then played in a band for about 6 years. And then I just came to a point where the idea of living with 3 other dudes in a smelly van for many more years of my life wasn't going to be the best option. So I decided to go back to school at that point. And basically, I wanted to do something with a social justice sort of focus, and had no idea that you could even do that in university, but came across a professor. I did my undergrad at the University of Northern British Columbia, and there was a feminist professor there teaching feminist geography. So I took a course with her, and it just opened up a new world for me that academia could be, have a social justice slant to it, and you could do really cool things there. So I basically, that was the hook for me. And initially, growing up in northern BC, I really just wanted to get out. I felt like it was really isolated and trapped and separate from the world, sort of thing. And I got interested in doing quote unquote development work, and took some classes on international development and that sort of thing. And I originally thought that that's the field that I would work in, and not planning to go into academia at all. But the more I learned, the more disillusioned I became with that, and decided to do an MA, thinking that I would, work in the NGO community. Most of my research has been in Cambodia, and so I thought I might do some work in Cambodia. But as I went through my master's degree, I became pretty disillusioned with the way the NGO community operates, and then sort of by default just kept studying because I didn't know what else to do, and ended up doing a PhD. And now I get to be disillusioned with academia instead. So
it sounds like your life is just filled with being disillusioned.
Well, in some ways, I mean, there's lots of hopeful stuff too. I mean, interactions with students is great. There's lots of, really vibrant, excited students who are really into what they're doing. So that, that puts a smile on my face and makes my days more exciting, basically. And I, as I've learned through the years that, I just don't place any limits on what I write about. So, I mean, I write a lot about anarchist geographies, which is not necessarily welcomed in a lot of quarters, but I just haven't really cared. I've decided to do what I want to do, and I'll write about and read about things that interest me. So
you mentioned that, like, when you first started going to university, like, you wanted to focus on something social justice wise. Like, what led you to that? Was there something, like, before? Was it like in your band, or maybe the subculture your band was part of?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, even before the band, like as young as I can remember, I always just cheered for the underdog. Right? It was always whether it was the sports team or, I mean, I was really. I'm still a huge Masters, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe fan, but it was always cheering for Skeletor, right? Because Skeletor's team always lost, and so it was like, dude, come on, Skeletor's team, you got to keep trying, right? So it was always like that kind of sentiment, which I don't know. And I've always been kind of, willing to speak my mind in the face of power, whether that was to my parents, which they didn't necessarily always appreciate, but, why was I a bad school teacher or a bad school student in high school? Because I didn't want to put up with some of the hierarchies that were imposed on us. So, as students, so it was always that kind of sentiment of just feeling that the world was a pretty unjust sort of place, and that we could all stand to do a lot better. And then through my band, I mean, it was a metal band. The name of the band was Fueled by Ignorance, and so the idea was to, I mean, it could be taken the wrong way, but the idea was growing up in a city where there's, systemic racism against Indigenous people and a really sexist sort of culture surrounding both youth and just the community in general. It was always an idea of pushing back against that. And so bands like Rage Against the Machine and some of the messages that they incorporated into their music, that always resonated with me. And we wanted to have a social justice sort of focus in the band. And then that just, when I saw that you could do that in academia as well, it was something that just really appealed to me.
So at what point were you actually introduced to, like, classical anarchist literature? Was it like during that time phase when you were really looking at the social justice movements and maybe the work like Rage was doing? Because I know like Zach and like Tom Morello, they've been, heavily involved in those type of, things. Is that where it kind of started from?
Probably a little bit. I mean, honestly, at that point in my life, I was before I decided to go back and get serious about, getting my degree and that sort of thing. It was more like it was a little bit of interest then, but I didn't get deep into it at that point. It wasn't really until I went back to school after the band was finished that I started to do a lot of reading. I mean, I was aware of those sorts of things and sort of dabbled in it a little bit, I suppose, but didn't get super serious about, reading things like Peter Kropotkin and Élisée Reclus and some of the early anarchist geographers, and going back to, or just anarchist literature in general, like Bakunin or Emma Goldman and that sort of stuff. It wasn't until it didn't come even in my undergraduate years. It wasn't until I was a grad student that I really started exploring that sort of literature and thinking, how can this inform the kind of work that I'm doing in Cambodia?
I was calling myself an anarchist way before I even knew who Bakunin was, or really what anarchism was, unfortunately.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's something that I've written about since, is that I think, if, anarchism is a label, of course, so it's in some ways something we just apply to ourselves. But at the same time, I've written about this idea that we're actually all born anarchists, and that what we, from the moment of our birth, what we're actually learning is structures of hierarchy and systems of domination, and that when we actually start to identify as anarchists, what we're actually doing is going through a process of unlearning those things, right? So no one needs to learn to be anarchist. I think it's pretty much innate in us, right? That we have this desire to be creative and free and explore ideas and who we are and what this world has to offer. And there's just so many systems and multiple layers of oppression that are piled on top of us, even in, labeling our bodies at the moment of our birth, deciding whether we're male or female. Why, that's the first sort of imposition that's placed upon us, assigning a gender at birth, sort of thing. And then it all sort of snowballs from there. And once you're introduced to anarchist ideas or literature or whatever, then we start to rethink all these things that we took for granted and start looking at the world in a slightly different way. But it's not learning, it's kind of unlearning, I think.
I'd even go so far as to say it's even innate to want to help one another and have that communal aspect, going all the way into why our eyes face forward and things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm always trying to convince people that, people are inherently good. Like we have everyone's self-interest at the best of heart because it's the best for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it connects with Kropotkin's idea of mutual aid, right? As a species, how do we survive on this planet? Fundamentally, it's through our relations with each other, right? And there's wider connections, of course, to it's all enmeshed in a web of life. But if we think about just the human component of that, it's very much our relationships with each other that enable us to just be, essentially. Particularly as mammals, right? We're connected to our mothers. We need our mothers. So it's something that is very much a part of us, and something, of course, that capitalism as a system tries to disconnect us from, as though we're all, each individual is against the world rather than a collective who can do progressive and exciting things together.
You've been using the term anarchist geography, and I'm not familiar with that term. Can you expand on that for me?
Yeah, basically I'm a geographer, so I'm a human geographer in particular, and it's basically what human geography means is just looking at, or what it means to me anyways, is looking at human relations in terms of our interactions through and across space. So the ways that we organize, for example, whether that's in cities, whether that's in smaller communities, whatever it might be. And anarchist geographies is just looking at that specifically through an anarchist perspective. So, the long lineage to that is, within the anarchist sort of field, people remember Kropotkin as an anarchist, but of course, geographers often remember him as a geographer. So he was writing about glaciers and mountains and things like that. Not even necessarily human geography, but the broader scope of just geography in general. And one thing that I've been trying to do, and that I think some of the early anarchist geographers didn't do so well, is to bring their politics to their geographical thinking. In some ways they did that, but it's only, I think, in more recent years that people have been a little bit more explicit about wanting to insert anarchist ideas into academic theories. So Kropotkin, for example, he was a pretty celebrated geographer at the time, right? He was he was offered a research chair at Cambridge, for example. But one of the things that he did to his benefit is they told him to basically stop any activism, stop engaging in anarchist discussions and that sort of thing. And he said, as a sort of mandate for him if he was to accept that chair, but he refused that idea and decided that his politics were too important. But nonetheless, he never brought them in so much to his geographical writings. So there's a journal, for example, the Geographical Journal, which is one of the oldest academic journals in geography, that you go back and it's still published today, and you go back 100 years and can look up articles by Kropotkin, and there's not a lot of anarchism coming out in those particular writings, right?
So was that kind of how you were introduced into anarchism, was through your learning through geography and learning about, old like geographers like Kropotkin, then seeing his other work?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was initially my interest was in feminist geographies, and I don't see, honestly, a whole lot of difference between feminist geographies and anarchist geographies, because to me, good feminism has an anarchist ethic, and good anarchism has a feminist ethic that I think they very much go together. And so a lot of the critical or radical geography that's taking place is from a Marxist sort of perspective, which always, again, it's this underdog sort of thing in me that within critical circles in my field, Marxism is taken for granted as the sort of mother's milk of radical geography. And that always bothered me whenever I see an orthodoxy, whether it's a radical one or not. If I see that start to emerge and start to become entrenched, it's like cause for alarm, right? That if we become too satisfied and a sort of unreflexive about the ideas or processes that we're engaging in, and then it's time to reassess those. And that was kind of one of my impetuses for moving into wanting to think about anarchism and its potential. But the other way that I sort of got into it was my research in Cambodia was looking at forms of state violence and the violence of capitalism and neoliberalism, and how that manifested in various forms, whether it's forced evictions or processes of homelessness and that sort of thing that are sort of current events or current patterns and processes that are underpinning Cambodian society. I was looking at these, what I was calling geographies of violence, and wanting to think through pathways out of violence. And so reading this literature on violence is when I really started to dig into the anarchist sort of readings at that point, because I found that the best critiques of state violence were obviously being made by anarchists. So
would this this form of geography that you're talking about, would it be like similar to like behavioral economics?
Well, I've got a sort of really negative view of economics overall as a field, because it does so much for the perpetuation of capitalism, sort of thing. So I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with behavioral economics to pin that down. But I mean, critical and radical geographies, it's just looking at various social processes, political relations, economic ideas, whatever it might be, and wanting to critique. I mean, the foundation of radical and critical geography is really a critique of capitalism, which of course is inherent to socialist thought. So hence the Marxian slant that's been applied to that. But of course, if you take a purely, econocentric view of the world and the way that these, bad things are happening, for example, it's not just capital that's the issue. It's also the state. It's also issues of race, gender. It's, multifaceted, to use the feminist term. It's intersectional, right? Mm-hmm. That all of these forms of domination come together. And within critical and radical geographies, often it's capitalism is placed at the very forefront, and sort of the other things fall to the background. Feminist geography foregrounds gender, and I think does a better job of bringing the pieces together. But there's been a really sort of state-centric or sort of unthinking view of the state within this particular field of scholarship that I think needed to be redressed, and hence there's a more recent emergence then of anarchist geographies.
Mm-hmm. I've always felt that the study of behavioral economics is just a way of capitalists to make people's behavior and their interactions that don't fit in their perfect capitalist system try to justify it and explain why it still fits in their system. It's like all the stuff outside of it that doesn't really fit. They're like, no, it does. Trust us, it works.
Yeah.
But how did you get involved with your work in excuse me.
Cambodia?
Yeah, Cambodia. Sorry.
Yeah. It was, basically serendipity. I was, again, as an undergraduate student, I was interested in doing some kind of development work and had, I was pretty green when I first went into it. I didn't know, a lot of the problematics that are involved with the idea of development, right? I mean, now I look at development as essentially the modern version of colonialism, right? That there's so many problems inherent to this particular model of economics and politics and social processes. But initially, that was my sort of interest, and I volunteered with an NGO in New Westminster, and their sort of mandate was just to send young people overseas to engage in some kind of development project. And originally they had me slated to go to the Dominican Republic. And so I spent a couple months reading on the DR and the issues that were going on there. And then I think it was about 3 weeks before I was supposed to fly out, they phoned me and said, actually, we're switching your project. We want you to be involved in this project in Cambodia instead. And so I said, okay, don't know anything about Cambodia, but sure, I'll go there. Sounds cool. And went and basically just fell in love with the country and the people, and knew that there were lots of problems and social justice issues that I could focus on. And my master's studies, I was already interested at that point of continuing my education. So I had already set up a master's program with, I did my MA at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. And the supervisor that I had there, or the prospective supervisor that I had there, was an African specialist, and I was going to do a project on South Africa with him, because the same summer I went to Cambodia, I also went to South Africa as part of a field studies course in my undergraduate program. And so I thought, I would just carry that forward and do some kind of project on that. But when I got back at the end of that summer, I sort of compared those two experiences and just really found that I was much more interested in Cambodia. So I phoned up my soon-to-be supervisor and just said, I know you haven't done any work in Cambodia, but is it cool if I switch my project to there and do something there instead? And he was supportive, and so it just sort of snowballed from there.
So what was your actual project in Cambodia?
Initially, I was just looking at democratic processes and the way, in particular, contestations of public space. So basically just looking at protest movements in the capital, Phnom Penh, and the way that people were using public spaces as a means to try and affect a more grassroots version of democracy. So I just spent a lot of time going around and observing protests. I'd find out when they were happening and where they would be located and that sort of thing. And tried to interview some of those people, of course, and talking to, people involved in labor unions and that sort of thing, because a lot of the protests were from garment factory workers who were concerned about their wages or working conditions, that sort of thing. But even things as mundane as protesting against the high price of gas, right? And there's a couple of examples where I remember very vividly going and just observing a protest where it's just, about 15 people standing on the side of the road just holding signs and that sort of thing and not causing any problems. at all. But the way the discourse that the government was sort of mobilizing was that any protest was a problem for the city, that it was not democratic, that it was particularly causing issues with traffic and upsetting public order and this sort of thing. But the reality was, if you watch these protests, it was just people with signs standing around not doing much. And the only problem happened is when the police showed up and started beating the crap out of the people. And so I witnessed this quite a few times. But one time in particular, I remember there was a pregnant woman at one of these protests, just protesting against the high price of gas and, not causing any problems. And I remember her getting kicked in the stomach by a police officer. And so that was, one of the worst things. I've seen a lot of pretty nasty things over the years of doing research in Cambodia, but that was one of the worst. And of course, the police converge on this small group of protesters, and nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd, and everybody starts to come in, and that's when traffic gets disrupted and, the shit hits the fan, so to speak. And so I was just looking at contestations of public space and ideas of democracy, and how people were feeling about the idea that their country was being touted as a new democratic society, and sort of the disillusionment they had with that idea in what was very overtly an authoritarian sort of system, and specifically, tying that into neoliberalizing processes, because Cambodia had, most people know Cambodia for the Khmer Rouge, and of course there was a Vietnamese occupation of the country following the Khmer Rouge for about 10 years, and the international community, given the sort of views of socialism that the world had at that time, basically turned their back on Cambodia and didn't offer any kind of assistance until the Soviet Union fell, and then it was safe to basically pry Cambodia open for business at that point. So in the early 1990s, there was a transition to a free market economy, which meant that, supposedly that would bring democracy and peace to the country. But of course, all it brought was a lot more problems, just in a different fashion than they were before. Now the problem was really with capitalism and the way that can work sort of lock, stock, and barrel with authoritarianism.
And how's the government justifying the police violence? Is there a lot of media presence around these protests?
The way they justify it is just that protesters are inherently violent. There's lots of media coverage, but they routinely, I shouldn't say routinely. They routinely intimidate journalists. They used to kill them. That doesn't happen so often anymore, to say that it's routine. But for a number of years, it most certainly was routine that journalists went missing or ended up in ditches all the time. And the way they've justified it for years and years. I've been doing research in Cambodia now for over a decade, and the way it's most often justified is just that we're the government, everyone else can shut up, right? We're right, you're wrong, and too bad for you. That our violence isn't violence, and your violence is the worst violence that there possibly is. More recently, they've had to. The last election was in 2013, and there was a massive sort of, I shouldn't really say uprising, but outpouring of concern and public dissent, that there was about 100,000 people gathered on the streets in Phnom Penh, pushing back against the government. And what they did at the time was they started rolling armored personnel vehicles into the city and brought in, all the weaponry they had, basically. I was in Cambodia at the time that this happened, and so I got to see it firsthand. And the place that I was staying was actually behind the police barricade. So they brought in all the military that they had in the whole country and converged it on the city to stop this from, the government basically thought they were going to fall at that point, which, in reality, they did lose the election. It was a stolen election for sure. There's something like a million ghost voters on the register, and people were showing up to ballot boxes and being told, surprise, you've already voted, and various things like that, which took place. So effectively they stole the election. But anyways, the place I was staying was behind the police barricade. So it was like, I don't know if you've seen the 80s movie filmed in New Zealand, Quiet Earth, where all the people in the world disappear, sort of thing.
Mm-mm.
But I was able to walk around the inner part of the city behind this barricade, and because I'm a visible other, they didn't pay too much attention to me. But the reason for this sort of cordoning off of the central core of the city is the Prime Minister's house is right in the center of the city, right? And so it was creating this massive perimeter around his home so that he was saved from any sort of uprising that might take place in contestation to that stolen election. So how the government is responding now is, since 2013, for probably about a year, they started playing really nice, that they were humbled by that experience and that they were going to do better and that sort of thing. But more recently, they've just returned to the violent rhetoric and that people better watch out, and there's no way that in the next election they're going down and this sort of thing. So we'll see.
If I found myself in that situation, I know my initial reaction would be like, how the fuck can I help the people, right? Like, I'm behind these lines. Like, was that like the reaction you were having?
Yeah, it was. I didn't know how to help, right? I mean, it's in some ways, this is for Cambodians to decide this question, right? It's not for me. I mean, I have my ideas, what I'd like to see happen, but it needs to come from Cambodians, whether they want to, whatever it is they want to do. And a lot of people were really pissed off. And so I talked to people about, what was going on and that sort of thing. But being behind that particular perimeter, it was just like it was kind of surreal, honestly, because I mean, I don't know if you've spent any time in Southeast Asia, but the streets are filled with people. They're alive with activity, right? It's very different from a North American city. They're, where the automobile sort of dominates in Southeast Asian cities like Phnom Penh. It's, there's a really vibrant sort of street culture, and that was just like totally absent. There was like nobody on the street. So it was very, very strange. And that lasted for a couple of days. They kept up that perimeter until they felt that the people had, subsided their sort of anger about the outcome enough to go home, I suppose. But yeah, it was difficult to know what to do in that particular case, because when you see a lineup of soldiers who are armed to the teeth, basically with fully automatic weapons, it's like, how much can you actually do in the face of that, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Totally.
It just like, it's that contradiction of like, you have that personal like stance of trying to fight against all hierarchies and state violence, and you're the witness of this massive uprising of state violence. Like, there's not much you can do, but it's just that overriding feeling of like, fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's an issue I always had with like liberals citing that their oppression and in protests and stuff. They don't really understand oppression from their privileged perspective.
You mean like, especially like in America?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
American liberals.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you rethink a lot of. I mean, for me, I don't place a lot of value in elections at all. Right, as an anarchist, I don't vote in. There's we just had an election in Canada, and it's like, yay, new guy, same as the old guy. He's got a better haircut, but so what, right? It's the same shit, different pile, and people are all celebratory that. Canada is now saved. Canada's back. Where were we? What happened to us? Well, we still have a guy who's very much in support of big oil and very much in the back pocket of, corporate Canada. So how much has actually changed through an election? But in a context like Cambodia, like it's difficult for me to say to people, you shouldn't care about this electoral process, right? Because that's what they've vested all their, they've spent many years fighting for the very idea of having the right to vote. So it's hard to mount the same kind of critiques that we might mount here in North America in a context like Cambodia.
Do you ever feel like kind of an ass being like, I have all these rights and I'm just going to say fuck you to them and I'm not going to participate because it's a flawed system anyways, but you have these other people who are just fighting for the basic right that we are taking advantage of? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean sometimes, but for me, here's the different geographies, right? As a geographer, I think that you have to contextualize this. So in the Canadian context, the way our electoral system works is that our election, particularly living in BC, our election is decided well before anyone even places a vote in British Columbia, right? That it's Ontario, where the population base primarily is, who decides what the government in Canada is going to be. So if every single person in BC protested the vote and didn't show up to the ballot box, it wouldn't matter, two shits anyways. It would be the same outcome. So there's that sort of idea that goes there. But at the same time, for me personally, it's like, I don't want to lend my support to a system that is fundamentally designed to disempower us, right? This idea that voting is the limit of our political horizon is absolutely wrong on every level. And so I can't say that to Cambodians who have vested so much into that idea, right? I think they need to struggle for that idea and then start to think about how they might be able to reconfigure and make their political system, whatever they want it to be. I have my ideas of it wanting to be a more grassroots sort of system of politics, but that's for them to decide, essentially, right? But I guess in Canada, I'm entitled to have that vote, so I exercise it by not exercising it, and I'm sure that wins me, not a lot of fans in many quarters, but I think the critique is very valid in this context, nonetheless.
How do your students take your politics?
Well, I think, I don't know. Some of them probably think I'm a total nut bar, but some of them, probably appreciate the different sort of perspective. The way that I approach it is I wear my politics on my sleeve, and I explicitly say I'm not trying to convert any of you into replicas of me. What I want them to do is to think for themselves, right? If they all became me, if they all thought exactly like me, then the world would be kind of a boring place. If we all, had the exact same ideas, there wouldn't be any fun left, right? Essentially, maybe it would be a better world if everything was designed the way that I thought it might be. It would be better for me, certainly, right? Obviously, because I'm me. But yeah, I don't try to shove, my ideas down anyone's throat. Talking about veganism too, right? They know that I'm a vegan, and I make my critiques from time to time and let them know what I think about things. But at the same time, it's like I want them to have the opportunity to think these ideas through for themselves and come to their own conclusions. If I'm the one who's telling you must think this way, right, that's only going to last so long. If they independently come to the idea that, there's actually something worthwhile within anarchist philosophy that I can apply to my everyday life, then there'll be a deeper connection and a deeper sense of value for those ideas. And the same with veganism as well. If it's something that they can internalize by opening up their eyes to the idea that there's a lot of really violent ideas and processes and patterns that are involved in the production and consumption of meat, then that's better than me. And they come to that realization through thinking critically. That's better than me just hammering them over the head and saying, you're wrong for eating that hamburger or whatever, right?
I mean, as an anarchist, I'm making an assumption here that you probably openly welcome your students to challenge you, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I say that to them right from the outset. Like anything I say, and not just me, but all of your professors and everyone you've ever encountered in your life, take it with a grain of salt, right? Like you have to you take all the various ideas that you've ever encountered in your life, whether bad or good, and they all influence you in a particular way, right? The stuff that you think is total crap and rubbish, that influences you too, because it helps you think that's not what I think. And perhaps for some students that, have a really xenophobic sort of outlook or a really kind of entrenched right-wing perspective, they might think what I have to say is total quackery, but I hope they can appreciate some of the critiques as well. So I lay out my politics, but then I try to work around that in, using various sort of examples or abstractions to get them to think in a slightly different way about the political, the political question that's on the table, and try to arrive at a new conclusion, perhaps. And sometimes it's successful, and sometimes probably not. But
have you ever had a student like seriously try to challenge you?
Like that anarchism sucks and that I'm crazy and that sort of stuff,
or veganism sucks, or just but not just hey it sucks, but like come to you with really deep, valuable discussion points and like a real challenge of like a real critique.
Sometimes, I mean, this semester was actually one of the, there's good critiques, right? I mean, anarchism, like anything else, it's not beyond critique. And the same with veganism. I mean, these are ideas that I'm committed to, but there's always room for critique in any idea, right? What are the blind spots? What are the absences? What are we missing? What are the silences that are embedded within the current patterns of thought that we have? If we think we've got it all figured out, we absolutely don't, right? This is one of the key lessons I've learned from the work I've done in Cambodia. Like the Khmer Rouge on paper, the ideas that they wanted to put in practice, well, that sounds all great, right? But the minute they thought they realized the utopia that they had sought to create was the minute they shot themselves in the foot, and that it became this grotesque, genocidal system. And so if we get too arrogant and think we've got it all figured out, then we only create problems for ourselves. So I welcome the challenges. I welcome the critiques. I think it's part of moving social theory and social justice forward. But so there's been lots of good critiques over the years, but this semester in particular was, I think I'm teaching a course called, or it's finished now, but a course called Space and Power, and trying to bring a relationship between geography and politics, right? Quite explicitly, and the way that power is embedded in everything we do, and power not just as a top-down sort of trajectory, but something that we mobilize from below as well, right? So this entanglement of power, if you will. And some of the things we talked about in the course, we talk about Orientalism and othering and racism, and we talked about migration and citizenship and that sort of thing. And that's when things this semester became particularly heated because of what's going on with the refugee crisis. And were a few students who were quite, for lack of a better way of saying it, quite embedded in some of the xenophobic discourses that are being circulated at the moment. And it's just really hard to, I can't come out and say, you're being racist, right? I can't say that to a student directly. I have to try and use a different kind of language to get them to try to see another way of thinking about these political questions that's more inclusive. And it was super, super difficult this semester to do that, because there were a few students that were kind of feeding off of each other in a negative sort of way.
And I can imagine that right now, especially because I know the Canadian government has, agreed to take on a lot more refugees than especially the U.S. I mean, we say we'll do something, but then nothing will ever happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so we just had, I mean, the government that we had before the Harper government was, very much against bringing in refugees. And then, our supposed savior, Justin Trudeau, was a little more open to that idea. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, Canada's commitment is an absolute joke too, right?
I mean, it's a drop, right?
Yeah, it's a drop in the bucket. It's laughable in comparison to the scope and magnitude of this problem, right? But
the U.S. is even worse. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally maddening. And so you think of the percentage of the Canadian population that would be shifted, and it's like a fraction of a percent. But then there's nonetheless these ideas that come about and are perpetuated through the media and social media as well and whatnot. And it's basically that Canada is going to turn into a Muslim country if we're not careful, and there'll be all this crap about totally disproportionate to the issue. And I mean, we're talking about people who are losing their lives, and their children are winding up dead on beaches and stuff like that. And we're more concerned about the profile of Canada, well, and the situation of immigrants and that sort of thing. So there's this decidedly colonial logic that overpins all of this too, right? Because we just seem to forget that, well, the way all this discussion about us and Canadianness and that sort of thing, it's all garbage in a sense, right? That this is a white colonial society that's been imposed on the indigenous cultures that existed here before. So this talk about saving a pure Canada and bringing it, to what it should be and what it was, well, we've already transformed the character of Canada in a multitude of ways that have been explicitly genocidal and violent, yet nobody wants to talk about that, right? Our own history of violence and now our willingness to perpetuate by keeping other people out. I mean, the question we could ask is, if these were refugees from Australia or New Zealand, would there be the same sort of hesitation in allowing them to come to Canada?
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And absolutely not. It would be no question. Oh my God, this is such a problem. We have to help these people out. But it's just this construction of an us and them and a total othering process, as though, because they don't look like your standard white Canadian and don't practice the same religion, that somehow they're not even considered human. And it's just disgusting.
The fear-mongering around terrorism, it only takes a few bad apples to leak in to create a violent terrorist attack or something.
Yeah, which is a great question for the United States, right? I mean, how many what's happening in the U.S. now in terms of domestic white terror, particularly from white males, right?
Exactly.
If we're wanting to talk about an epidemic of terrorism, well, it's coming from white males. So let's start examining that question, the question of white male violence.
Absolutely. Well, to lighten things up a little bit, I guess. How did you get into veganism? Was it the same path as your anarchism?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, as a kid, just always sort of wanting to, question why do we do things? Why is the world the way it is, right? And I was never comfortable as a kid. My family were meat eaters, and I ate meat when I was a kid, and sometimes didn't think about it too much, but then sometimes would think quite a bit about it and get to the point where I would skip the meat some meals and that sort of thing, until the point where I was a teenager, when I really just started to think it through and decided that I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so I had a chat with my mom one evening and just said, like, I'm just not eating that food. That's not food to me anymore. I'm not participating in that. And she said, well, the family eats it, so da 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 da. And I said, well, you don't have to do anything special for me. I'll just eat the carrots on the side or whatever it is that you make. It's all good, sort of thing. And I just basically, it was like one day, just cold turkey, just stopped, no more, sort of thing. And kind of, I mean, I'm still a huge metal fan, and was as a teenager, it was like hugely influential on me. And I was, at the time, it was like, I was really into Carcass, a British grindcore band.
Uh-huh.
And basically the cover of their first and second album, Symphony of Sickness, their first album, it just shows all these pieces of meat and human limbs all mixed together, right? And it was just like, it just hit the message home so vividly for me that there's a real problem here. What's the difference between that flesh and our flesh, right? And what we're actually consuming is just gore. It's like utterly grotesque. And so that Symphony of Sickness and Carcass sort of was one of the points of awakening for me. And I didn't go vegan at that point because I didn't even really know what vegan was. So I was vegetarian, and it wasn't until a few years later. So I was probably, I don't know, 15 or 16 when I went vegetarian. And then it was probably about, maybe not 10 years, but maybe like 6, 7, or 8 years after that I started to think a little bit more critically about the problems of egg production and dairy production, and decided that wasn't for me at that point either as well.
Were there any other bands that you felt like were like really influential to your politics?
Napalm Death was, a really sort of left-leaning band. To me, that was what really attracted me to metal, right? Like now, there's a lot of metal today that's like overtly right-wing, right? It's like there's some pretty problematic bands out there. But for me, the spirit of metal and what attracted me to it was just the idea of, the rebellious aspect of it, I suppose, that went with my personality in other areas of my life. When I was in my early 20s, I got really into Earth Crisis and sort of the straight edge vegan hardcore stuff as well. So
I think you're among many people.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was probably Napalm Death was, in terms of, when I was a younger teenager, that was one of the big ones. But some of the Bay Area thrash bands as well, like Testament and Exodus, even Metallica and Slayer. There's some political messages that are embedded within within their music. But it was like, kind of actively seeking out those bands that would have a little bit more of a political slant to what they were singing about, and the left-wing side of it was what appealed to me the most.
You said that like in current metal, there's a huge shift towards like right-wing stuff. I'm not huge into metal. I grew up punk hardcore, and I'm definitely not up on any new metal stuff. So what is that all about?
Well, I don't think it's a huge shift. It's just there's still a lot of left-leaning bands that are around, like newer bands like, I guess they're not that new anymore, but Lamb of God and Machine Head still have like a very leftist sort of politics, right? But there's bands like All That Remains that are, the singer from that band, I think, is a total idiot. Like, he's just got this complete I don't know, almost Hitler-esque aspect about him in terms of his vision of what's possible and how politics should be organized and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of sexism within metal that I think is really problematic, and homophobia and that sort of thing. So there's aspects of the metal community that I think are, tremendously problematic. Some of the, I was talking about Carcass as a grindcore band, right? That was hugely influential, but some of the grindcore that's come since Carcass has been, this taking it to an extreme that involves sort of, I don't know if you've heard of like porn grind. I can't even think of any of the bands because I don't listen to.
I've never heard of
those
porn
kind
grind.
of bands, but it's like just hugely misogynistic and takes the aspect of gore. Like Carcass did it like from a perspective of using medical textbooks and wanting to make it to bring gore in I guess in a more sophisticated fashion. But there's been other bands that have taken that up and just done it in the most sort of reductionist kind of way, the unthoughtful, uncreative sort of just whatever to purely shock. And there's just quite a few bands that have really misogynistic messages embedded within their lyrics. And they might say, oh well, it's just entertainment or whatever, but I guess we could ask ourselves, why are we entertained by misogyny? Should we be?
And I think a lot of like music genres have some of those ones that are on the edge. Like I think Screwdriver in like the punk or Oi, they're very racist skinhead type of band. And Oi in itself has a lot of skinhead bands that go the other direction. There's your sharps and your skinheads against racism, and then the regular skinheads.
Yeah. And I mean in the I'm huge into black metal as well. So the Norwegian black metal scene, I mean, there's a very rightist sort of politics embedded in a lot of that music as well, which is, there's certain bands that have avoided that and just, dealt with other sorts of lyrical themes, but there's certainly a group of bands who have gone fully into that. And now there's I don't listen to any of these bands, but there is apparently a whole sub-scene of neo-Nazi black metal bands that are, doing whatever it is they do and making the world a shittier place, basically.
Is there anything like in either the anarchist circles or the animal rights circles that you wish you were seeing more of from activists that you just maybe isn't necessarily being like popularized?
Well, I mean, within anarchist circles, I think, an appreciation for veganism is still a huge problem, right? I think the way that speciesism is separated from other forms of domination is really problematic. Like, I don't know, I often have difficulty understanding how people can identify as anarchist but not be vegan, right? And at the same time, I have difficulty in understanding how people become vegan without appreciating an anarchist critique. So that's something that I think, that needs a lot more work in bringing those threads together, right? But I mean, still within some anarchist or manarchist circles, there's not even an acceptance of gender as being a problem either, right? So I think there's, these are some of the critiques that can be mounted against anarchism, that there's, even within a supposedly emancipatory framework, there are still some people who are very much committed to non-emancipatory ideas, if you will. So that's the biggest one for me, is the disconnect between veganism and anarchism. I just don't understand it at all. I have really a lot of trouble wrapping my head around it.
Do you have any way of helping to bridge that gap, that intersectionality?
I don't know. I mean, I guess just talking to people about it, right? If they're, I mean, we have an anarchist book fair here every year in Victoria, and there's groups that come and set up their stall and are willing to talk to people about veganism and its importance to anarchism and that sort of thing. But it's definitely not the busiest stall at the book fair, that's for sure. Which is, I wish more people would go and just have those kinds of conversations. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know the quick fix solution other than continuing to try and press that agenda within anarchist circles, right? And it's something that if I reflect critically on what I've done so far in terms of my own writings in anarchist geographies, if you will, is I haven't started. I've only just started writing about anarchism, and there's every year there's a huge meeting of geographers in the United States. It's called the Association of American Geographers, and they have an annual meeting. And the one coming up next year is in San Francisco in late March. And I finally organized a session just called Vegan Geographies to try, the connection isn't explicitly to anarchism yet at this point. So I want to write about vegan anarchist geographies at some point, but just to bring a conversation of veganism into academic geography. It's starting to happen in other, vegan sociology and vegan anthropology, that these sort of conversations are starting to happen. But it could certainly, you would think in anarchist circles that people would be much more receptive to these ideas.
Do you think it would be easier to approach the anarchist circles from and talk about veganism, or more easier to approach the vegan circles, the animal rights circles, as far as anarchism is concerned?
Well, I guess one of the points of critique that I think anarchists have of veganism, and that I think is valid, is that a lot of veganism is based on sort of liberal ideas, right? There's a lot of vegans out there who they're not really thinking about the pattern of domination, or they're just thinking about it from a really sort of liberal perspective, which I think turns some anarchists off, as though there is nothing useful about a vegan politics, which I think is a problem, right? There's no reason that veganism needs to be liberal, right? It can be something else. It can be much more radical than the way that liberals would want to conceptualize it. And so I guess the problem of bringing anarchism into these sort of vegan circles, and I just reflect on some of, the vegan community here in Victoria, is that it is a very liberal politics, and anarchist ideas might be, cause for shock and horror for some people, as it, that vegans aren't unique to the general population, right? Anarchism as a word still, it makes people uncomfortable, because basically they don't really understand what it means. And so part of the project of bringing anarchism to a wider circle, vegans and non-vegans alike, is to try and reclaim that word as something that's positive and productive, rather than something that's, the way people conceptualize it as just chaos and violence and whatever.
I find that when you talk to a lot of people in the animal rights community and you talk about anarchism, it's almost like a dirty word, like same way of talking about like the Animal Liberation Front, or other groups are doing things that are on what I would say more on the forefront of activism, and that's what like brought me towards activism. Like that's what really like excited me about activism, that real direct action, that getting shit done, aspect of it. So I've never understood why people are like, oh no, let's not talk about that. Like it just, I don't know. It just irritates me. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. I mean, it's total misunderstanding, right? Because, going back to this idea that we're all born anarchists, well, everybody acts as an anarchist in various ways in their everyday life, right? We engage in mutual aid, right? The example I often give to my students is the classic dinner party example, right? That how many times have you invited friends over to dinner? Like, who here has had friends over to dinner at one point in their life? Raise your hand, and everybody raises their hand. And then I ask, and did you give them a bill at the end of the night? How much did you charge them for eating dinner at your house? And the answer is, well, you didn't charge them anything, right? So your only objective there was to, build a friendship and have a camaraderie, and on the hope that, perhaps one day they'll return the favor, i.e. mutual aid, have you back for dinner at their house. So, there's really anarchism as a philosophy and an idea put into practice, it happens in really everyday circumstances, and it's happening all the time, right?
Yeah.
And people just don't recognize that, because they think it's just something that it's absolutely not.
I love that example. So if you don't mind, I'm probably going to start stealing that one.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, it just
simple.
It simplifies it so well. Yeah. Yeah, it really does. Well, holy shit! I can't believe it. I just looked at the clock. We're already over an hour. How can people get a hold of your work, see what you're doing, and follow what you're doing?
Well, I have an academia.edu website. So if you Google my name, Simon Springer, you can find my academia website. And basically, I put everything up. Like, I'm not a big believer in copyrights. I think that's a problem, especially for research that is for the public and should be available to the public. So I don't like the paywalls that are imposed. So I put everything up on my academia website that people can access freely whenever they want. So pretty much everything I've ever written is posted on that website. So people can go nuts if they want to.
Yeah, awesome. We'll put a link to that in the show notes for everyone.
Nice.
Will we end every episode saying fuck, shit, damn? Would you mind saying it for us this week?
Fuck, shit, damn.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
This week you heard
Race Out by Battles.
Right now you're listening to
Malaria Codes by the Octopus Project.
Did you know that we put the links to buy all this music in the show notes, so you can just click right on it and see what bands they are and help support them? I don't know if people knew that or not. And the other great thing you can do is, if you go check out the bands, or if you don't, review us on iTunes.
Yeah, so while you're on iTunes, just click on that little 5-star under Which Side Podcast, write a sweet review, and show us that you love us.
You could even write, I'm just doing this because I want them to shut the fuck up every week after the episode, which is fair. I want to shut the fuck up about this.
Yeah, we will shut the fuck up if you actually do it.
Do it.
But until then,
we're going to keep doing it.
If you're not yet our friend on social media, be our friend. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr. We respond to every message that we get because we want to be your friend.
You want to know a really fun fact about social media? You don't actually have to like us to follow us. It's true.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a good point.
Yeah.
You do have to like us on Facebook because
you have to click the like button.
That's a like button.
But it doesn't mean you emotionally like us.
Yeah, you could hate us.
You could totally hate us and hit like.
I mean, I know a lot of people who like Donald Trump just to stay,
just to get his updates,
just to get the updates. So
yeah, I just a thought. You don't have to like us to do it.
We should get that anarchist Bernie Sanders on. It'd be sweet.
I heard that he co-wrote every single crime thing.
Oh, totally.
Yeah,
he invented veganism.
Totally fucking true.
He protested himself because he's so anarchist. Badass.
A motherfucking anarchist Bernie Sanders.
Not like that socialist Hillary.
Fuck shit damn.
Fuck shit damn.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.